interesting argument there, Brock, about slavery. Of course, the truth of the matter being that at that time in history, there were very few atheists in America. So any voices from the atheists would have been easily drowned out by voices from pretty much anyone else. What you do fail to mention is that it wasn't the Christians that freed the slaves, or I should say, it wasn't only the Christians that freed the slaves, but the Christians also had the slaves. As a matter of fact, many Christians fought and died to retain the right to keep slaves, Brock. But then again, that's using the same kind of argument you used, because we're talking about a country at the time that was composed primarily of Christians, as it still is today. Hence, Brock, of course it would have been someone who was Christian that opposed slavery and that fought to free the slaves, as well as it was Christians who supported slavery and fought to retain their slaves. It was Christians that brought the slaves over. It was Christians that made them work in the fields. It was Christians that wanted those slaves, Brock. But that's only saying that because, again, the demographics of the time, the majority of the country were composed of Christians. I could say it this way: white people opposed slavery. But white people also wanted slavery. It was the white people that had slaves. It was the white people that bought slaves. Yet it was also the white people who fought to free the slaves. You see where I'm getting at here? It's a misrepresented argument, and a rather ignorant one at that. But at least you admitted that you got this argument from a book. However, you still didn't admit to basically quoting this argument from the article almost verbatim. I'll put a link to the original article by Denish D'Souza, or D'Souza, however you pronounce his last name, in the sidebar of this video. Because, it's better to read it from the original author than from Brock here. So, and I want to say, as I was searching, I was kind of curious, so I kind of looked up a few things. And this is just to everyone else. This isn't to you, Brock, even though you may not like it. I've always suspected that you get material from creationist websites, and that's only because you're using the old, tired, worn-out creationist arguments that have been dealt with 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 60 years ago for some. But surprisingly, as I'm doing this research, I find a story about an apple tree. Not quite the same story you talked about with your wife, but very similar. So, Brock, because you do have a tendency to plagiarize other sources without giving reference to those sources, we can see that your arguments against atheism and your arguments against evolution, they're all plagiarized arguments. And some of them are pretty much verbatim the arguments given by other creationists. And then, of course, this one, where at least you admitted you got the idea of a book, but you didn't admit that you were quoting the argument nearly word for word, again by Denish D'Souza. I'm beginning to wonder, Brock, if that whole love story of yours was simply another plagiarism of a poem that has an unknown author that can be found on the web. Now, true, that poem could have been from your wife, so I can't say for certain it wasn't. But the one article I read regarding that poem said it was from a beautiful 40-year-old woman, so the ages could match. The earliest date on that poem was 2005. December, I think it was. So again, that could be from your wife, though it's not a verbatim story, which means that your wife may have gotten inspiration from it when she wrote that letter to you. So I'm unsure as to whether or not you're actually being honest about that story as well. I hope you're not, because it's a very beautiful story. But Brock, You gotta stop plagiarizing things. Stop misrepresenting science. Stop misrepresenting arguments. Stop lying, because your credibility is beginning to, well, it never was really there to begin with, but now it's falling apart even more. I mean, just in one of your comments to me, claiming that you likely had more formal education than I have. Well, whether that's true or not, it's obvious that your education wasn't in the subjects that you like to speak about. And the truth is, you can have a PhD in English, Brock. It doesn't give you the knowledge necessary to speak on science. You could have a PhD in music, Brock. It doesn't give you the knowledge necessary to speak on the topic of evolution. You can even have a PhD in theology, Brock, but it certainly doesn't give you the knowledge base required to speak on the subjects of thermodynamics. So, Brock, whether you have more formal education than I do is debatable. But what is sure is that your education on the subjects that you deal with in your videos is at a bare minimum, and you don't know what you're talking about. You're unlearned in these subjects. So, I'm going to stop it there. You have fun with your delusions of, well, whatever the heck you have. And I'll definitely see your next video. But I will warn you, Brock, I will be pointing out any videos you make that are directly plagiarized. And I'm going to be going through some of your back videos and double checking to see if they're plagiarized. And if they are, and if I can find actual sources, I will post them in videos so that people can see that you're just like Venom Fang X when he started out. Of course, he plagiarized Ken Hovind. You seem to have a little bit broader range. But either way, it's dishonest. It also leads to the problem I mentioned to you before, that the laziness when it comes to researching these topics. You read something, you think it sounds good, you go out and spout it on a video. You don't research the topic. You don't ingest the material, digesting it, understanding it, comprehending it, and then regurgitating it out to your audience. You're like a bulimic. You just gobble down the information on the one page and then just regurgitate it right onto video. It's a slimy, disgusting mess you produce. But in some ways it's entertaining, and it also serves as an example to people on what not to be when they see your videos, and then they see the refutations of these videos from a number of people showing how your videos are fallacious, misrepresenting, strawman arguments, etc. So, Brock, have a nice day.